the lunar rover would have been equipped with a very sophisticated navigation system that the astronauts would have used according to the mission reports. This is the block diagram of this navigation system. In this navigation system there is an analog block and a digital block. This diagram shows the components of the analog block. And this diagram shows the components of the digital block. The box which has been circled in blue was containing these two blocks, and we should believe that this rather little box would have contained these two blocks with all their electronic components. With a modern technology, such miniaturization would be possible, but in the time of Apollo, such miniaturization was not possible. And if we can see the connection with the gyro unit, circled in red, of which it was using the information, were the other connections with the odometer, the roll and pitch readings, and with the display console. The digital block would have allowed to control digital indicators which are in the part which has been circled on the display console of the rover. An indicator, the circular one, allows to give the angle in degrees of the rover relatively to the lunar north, and another one the angle of the rover relatively to the lunar module in degrees, too. This supposes quite a good precision. But if the rover had such indicators, why was it needing to have a sun-shadowed device, which has been circled on the display console? Moreover, this sun-shadowed device was only working when the rover was oriented so that the rover had the sun in its back. It couldn't work when the sun was in front of the rover, or even when it was on its sides. So why not provide the astronauts with a real sundial which could work in any orientation of the rover? And Charlie Duke didn't seem to know that the rover had a such navigation system, for when he was asked how the astronauts were finding their way back to the lunar module without a magnetic compass, he just replied that they were following the rover's tracks back. Shouldn't he have replied that he was reading the digital indicator giving the orientation of the lunar module relatively to the rover? Now, what were the data that the navigation system was working with? First, it was needing the three orientation angles of the rover. The roll, that is the angle around the lengthways axis of the rover. The pitch, that is the angle around the horizontal axis which was perpendicular to the lengthways axis. And the yaw, that is the angle around the vertical axis of the rover. Concerning the roll and the pitch, it was possible to obtain them thanks to a special box which was on the side of the rover. These angle measuring systems use the principle of the pendulum to work. They use the lunar gravity in order to know the exact vertical. These systems measure the rotation angle around the axis which is perpendicular to their plane, and that is why they are placed perpendicularly to each other. Normally the indicator is oriented so that the astronaut can read the roll angle in front of him. If he looks on the left side he could read the pitch angle, but it is not very convenient for him to read it that way, not to say impossible. That's why the astronaut has the possibility to manually turn this indicator of a quarter of turn counterclockwise, so that he can read the pitch angle instead. But this is ridiculous. If he turns the indicator of a quarter of a turn, the two measuring systems are also going to be turned of a quarter of a turn, which means that the one which is supposed to measure the roll angle will in fact measure the pitch angle, and vice versa. Although the angle reading that the astronaut has in front of him is now labeled pitch, it is still a roll angle that the astronaut will read. Turning the angle indicator does not help. If the astronaut really wants to know the pitch angle, the only solution would be for him to try to read it on the left side of the indicator as it is in normal position, which is practically impossible for him. The documentation says that the pitch and roll angles are sent to the navigation system to update the navigation, but if the astronaut turns the indicator, not only it will not allow him to read the pitch angle, but furthermore the navigation will misinterpret the angles and will use the pitch angle instead of the roll angle, and vice versa, since the rotation of the indicator is purely manual, and the navigation system is not informed of this rotation, and thence does not know that the angles are swapped. Concerning the orbit was read with the gyro directional unit of which the location is indicated on this scheme in red. It is not a gyroscope like those used by the lunar module, but simply a device which can sense the actions of the driver on the steering system of the rover. It is a strange location for this gyro. We would rather have expected it to be close to the steering system. Concerning the distance which had been covered by the rover, it was obtained with an odometer. The odometer is a device which is fixed on a wheel and allows to measure its rotation, and obtain from this measure the car's speed and the distance it covers. In the mission report of Apollo 15, it is stated that the distance recorded by the odometer was quite close to the prediction, which suggests that it would have quite well worked. The speed indicator is circled on the scheme of the display console. Eugene Cernan has said that he had checked the speed on this indicator, and that he could read that the maximum speed of the rover was precisely 17 km/h. But it is surprising that Cernan could read the speed with such precision, for first the speed indicator is small and thus not easy to read, but furthermore is it not graduated in units, but 5 by 5. Now when we see the terrain that the rover was riding on, it would be surprising that the distance recorded by the navigation system would have been as precise as the mission report of Apollo 15 states it. And the astronauts don't seem to agree with the statement either, for they say this in a dialogue, as they are driving to the elbow crater. Scott, hang on, get a feel for this thing. 9 km/h, Joe. To Jim, hold the geology, let's get the rover squared away first. Pause, okay, 8 km/h, up a little rise. Okay, turning back. Pause, 203, huh? Okay. Oh, and it seemed like we were going much faster. Jones, because of the roughness of the terrain? Owen, I guess so. But also remember, we've never checked the rover navigation system, so we don't know it's right. It may say 1.3, but we may be at 1.9 or 0.7 because we've never done this before and there was a question of wheel slippage. You know, if your wheels slip a lot, your odometer is going to turn a lot, and you're going to think you're a lot further than you are. So we don't really have confidence in the nav system at this stage of the game. And there is still another problem with the odometer of the rover. In the documentation they say, the odometer logic cannot distinguish between forward and reverse wheel rotation, therefore, reverse operation of the LRV adds to the odometer reading. That means that the rover cannot make the difference between going forward and going backward. Yet it is important for the navigation that it could make the difference. The biggest problem with the navigation system is that it could lose its reference in case of lost power. It could also lose it in case that the astronaut would act on the navigation reset button. That's why it was senseless to provide a such button on the display console, at least so easily accessible. In the documentation they say that the rover had tried 50 meters after the start of the reinitialization before the data of the navigation station were valid again. So imagine that the rover has a problem which makes that it cannot move anymore at that precise moment. If the astronauts have to come back on foot to the LM, they have to know in which direction the LM is, otherwise they might be incapable to go back to it. But the rover had tried 50 meters before the navigation station gives a valid indication, and it can't. So what are the astronauts going to do? Carry the rover on 50 meters till the navigation station gives valid data? But the wheels of the rover probably need to have contact with the ground, so the astronauts are going to push it on 50 meters instead. Let's be serious. If the navigation system has lost a valid reference, there is no way that it can acquire it again all by itself. After having ridden 50 meters, the navigation will have updated from an invalid reference, and it will still have an invalid reference. It's like saying that the IMU inertial platform of the lunar module was able to initialize itself just after having worked a little. In fact, in order to initialize the IMU, it was necessary to make a star alignment. But this star alignment was not possible for the rover. So what was the solution for the rover to acquire again a valid reference it could start from? The solution could be that the rover would continuously send the navigation data to the Earth, so a computer on Earth could also update the navigation of the rover. And in case that the rover would need to acquire again a reference for its navigation, it could receive it from the Earth, from the computer which was also updating the rover's navigation. But that would suppose that the rover would be able to communicate with the Earth while the rover is moving. And that's precisely the problem, because the rover can only communicate with the Earth when the high-gain antenna is well oriented toward the Earth, and it does not happen when the rover is moving, because the orientation of this antenna relatively to the Earth keeps changing. That's why there is not a single video of the TV camera of the rover which is taken while the rover is moving. They all are taken with the rover at rest. And before the TV camera was starting filming, an astronaut was first orienting the high-gain antenna toward the Earth, so that the communication with the Earth was possible. There is only a unique exception, at the end of Apollo 17, on which we can see the TV camera filming the astronaut while he is driving the rover. But this video comes with an ironical comment which says that, in order for the video which is filmed by the camera of the rover to be correctly transmitted toward the Earth where it was watched, the high-gain antenna, the one shaped like an inverted umbrella, had to be correctly oriented toward the Earth. You can see that on this video the antenna of which we can see the shadow plays a gig, and certainly does not remain correctly oriented toward the Earth, and in spite of this the quality of the video does not suffer from it, and remains the same all along the sequence, which is contradictory with what the engineers said. This video is obviously a joke. That's why the solution of continuously sending the navigation data to the Earth while the rover is riding was not possible, and thence that it was not possible to receive a correct reference for the rover from the Earth in case that it would lose it. If an astronaut acts on the system reset button, the rover definitively loses its reference, and there is no way that it can acquire it again. But the astronauts can still use the solution of Charlie Duke, that is, followed the tracks of the rover back to the lunar module, provided that these tracks effectively lead to the lunar module, and don't get away from it.